Vice President Mike Pence and Senator David Perdue spoke at a Georgia rally. They emphasized the importance of religious liberty as well as the runoff elections. Pennsylvania's GOP lawmakers are switching course. They declared they will not make any moves to certify their own electors. This as Rudy Giuliani says they've let down America. The Arizona legislature taking action against the controversial voting system Dominion. Today, legislative leaders calling for an audit of its voting software and equipment. The Trump campaign's legal team presented at Nevada's first hearing on the matter Thursday. There, the lead attorney presented what he called the most compelling and most credible evidence of election fraud in the state yet. And the Chinese Communist regime is the greatest threat to the free world. This, according to the top U.S. intelligence official. In a sudden turn of events, Pennsylvania's GOP say they will not be taking measures to elect their own appointees to the Electoral College. And Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf said there is no reason for the state legislators to call a special session to resolve election issues because, he said, they have a free and fair election. This as GOP in other states are fighting to challenge election results.
I'm here in Savannah, Georgia, where we just heard from the Republican squad. We heard from Vice President Mike Pence as well as Senator David Perdue, and we were supposed to hear from Kelly Loeffler as well, but we were informed at the beginning of the event that she could not make it because somebody on her campaign staff was involved in an accident that actually took their life. We don't know who it was, but we know that it was a young man, Vice President Mike Pence said. So that's disheartening, but Collins was here to speak in Loeffler's place today. One thing we noticed that was a very big deal for Senator David Perdue is blocking the Green New Deal. He said this on many of his campaign stops that if the two Democrats do take those seats, the Green New Deal will be passed with no problem. So that's what he was saying. And of course, Vice President Mike Pence is really focused on making sure that he supports Loeffler and really getting the word out there about all the work he says that she's done, because we know that she was trailing behind her Democratic challenger, Raphael Warnock. Another big topic from Pence was religious liberty in America. And we talked to some people, some attendees here, and they also said they feel like the religious liberties in America are on the line. And that sort of theme of faith has been very strong among the Republican crowd this year. We've seen from all the campaign trails, all the campaign events that we've been to, that faith is very important, and that's one of the themes that we got from Alpharetta when we saw Linwood and Sidney Powell speak there. Many people were saying that God is on our side. And talking with one woman here today, I mentioned that to her because she was talking about her faith as well, and she said that it's not a partisan thing. And another man with her said it's about humanity and what's right for humanity. Of course, we know another big topic from Pence has been encouraging these Republicans to get out and vote in light of all that's happened in the Georgia elections. His overall message to these Republicans here in Savannah, Georgia was that stay in the fight. He encourages them over and over again. We've been to many of his campaign trails, and that's been his message. So that looks like it's his theme this year. So we'll see what President Trump has to say tomorrow at his event down in Valdosta. Melina Weisskopf reporting in Savannah, NTD News.
And in a sudden turn of events, Pennsylvania's GOP say they will not be taking measures to elect their own appointees to the Electoral College. And Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf said there is no reason for the state legislators to call a special session to resolve election issues because, he said, they had a free and fair election. This as GOP in other states are fighting to challenge election results.
In a shocking move, Pennsylvania's House of Representatives announced they would not be taking any steps to appoint their own electors to the Electoral College. This is after Pennsylvania's legislature heard testimonies of election fraud and even introduced a resolution to contest the state's election results. The letter was signed by Pennsylvania State President pro tempore Jake Corman, House Speaker Brian Cutler, Senate Majority Leader Kim Ward, and House Majority Leader Carrie Benninghoff. Pennsylvania's GOP lawmakers said, "This should not be misconstrued to suggest we will allow the issues presented with the 2020 general election to evade complete legislative review and action." We believe that many of the issues presented after the 2020 general election could have been avoided if not for the actions of Secretary Boockvar and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Rudy Giuliani responded, saying that Republican legislators in Pennsylvania are covering up for Democrat crimes. He said they have no explanation for why there are 700,000 mail-in ballots in the vote, but no record of them being returned. He went on to say that he is ashamed of the Republican legislature, that they completely misled the president and me, and they have let down America. The struggle between the members of the Republican Party and heads of state can also be seen in Michigan. Michigan GOP is saying a memo from Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson indicates she is pushing for the mass deletion of election data. The memo from the Michigan Bureau of Elections, which is overseen by Benson's office, says that software and associated files must be deleted from all devices after the certification on November 30th. This comes as another lawsuit is filed in Michigan, alleging election fraud and misconduct in Michigan's Wayne County. According to local media reports, the plaintiffs are asking a judge to order an immediate audit of election results. This is so potential issues can be identified and acted upon ahead of December 14th, when the state's 16 electors are scheduled to cast their presidential votes. Christina Kim, NTD News.
In Arizona, state lawmakers have begun to take action on election integrity. The state legislature has just called for an audit of Dominion software and equipment used in Arizona's most populous county.
In a press release published on Friday, the Arizona State Legislature announced an independent audit of the Dominion software and equipment that was used by Maricopa County in this year's election. The audit was called by the current Senate President Karen Fann and Speaker of the House Rusty Bowers, both Republicans. The GOP controls both chambers of the Arizona legislature. Incoming Senate Government Chair Michelle Ugenti-Rita and House Majority Leader Warren Peterson, both of whom are Republicans, joined them. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors agreed to the independent audit. In the statement, House Majority Leader Warren Peterson said that a significant number of voters believe that fraud occurred, and with the number of irregularities, it is easy to understand why. Especially concerning are the allegations made surrounding the vendor Dominion. It is imperative that the county immediately do a forensic audit on the Dominion software and equipment to make sure the results were accurate. The legislature's decision to audit voting software and equipment comes after the public hearing on election integrity this Tuesday. Multiple witnesses and experts testified on election fraud in front of 9 Republican state legislators.
Sidney Powell confirmed that she's obtained evidence of counterfeit election ballots from China being shipped into the U.S. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that interview.
Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood have both raised the question of counterfeit election ballots from China. And in an interview with Sean Lin from Braveheart, Sidney Powell confirmed that she's collected evidence related to fake Chinese ballots.
We do. We've heard a video of somebody ordering ballots from China. We have evidence of a significant plane load of ballots coming in, and we have a witness that has said they continue to come in because they intend to run counterfeit ballots in any runoffs or if they need them in recounts too. So it hasn't stopped.
Powell went on to say that they also have videos of ballots being transported across the U.S.-Mexico border. She also gave an update on Lynn Wood's election case in Georgia, saying the Federal Court of Appeals has been fully briefed on it and may make a decision this Friday.
They're going to have to find, if they get it right, they're going to have to find that the Georgia mail-out ballots that they sent out like 1.6 million of or something are not valid because the standards for filling out those ballots and voting by them is not the same standard required for people voting really absentee or by in person. And you can't have multiple different standards for people to vote. An equal protection of the law violation under Bush versus Gore.
At the state level, the Trump campaign testified at a Senate committee hearing on Thursday. Attorney Jenna Ellis told us she thinks the committee seemed very interested in the evidence, like the surveillance video of alleged voter fraud taking place.
I think it's been fantastic, and the legislators, of course, seem very interested in the testimony, particularly the video, because that corroborates the affidavits that we already had. And seeing
She says they're tackling the alleged election fraud from two angles, through the legislature and the courts.
Yeah, so of course we're on two tracks where we have, of course, the state legislator hearings, and the state legislatures can take action on their own, and we believe that they should with this very clear and convincing evidence of fraud. And then we also have the judicial track where we're asking the judicial branch and judges to make sure to protect election integrity and compel the state legislatures to fulfill their constitutional obligations. So
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp told Fox News that the video evidence the Trump campaign presented was concerning and that the state secretary, Brad Raffensperger, should be investigating it. We contacted the state secretary's office, but they didn't get back to us before airtime. The governor says he's called for a signature-based audit of ballots, but that the state secretary hasn't called for one. Kemp says it's Raffensperger's job to call for a signature-based audit. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
A polling manager in Fulton County, Georgia, told state legislators that while she was counting ballots, she came across a batch that were pristine. None had been folded and all appeared to be exactly the same. She says they could have been scanned copies.
My name is Susan Voiles.
Suzanne Voiles has worked as a poll manager for over 20 years. She told the Georgia Senate committee during a hearing Thursday about an odd batch of absentee ballots that caught her attention during the Georgia recount.
Most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, it was, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds.
Voiles said what first struck her about these ballots was the feel of the paper. She said when you have counted and held ballots for as long as she has, you know the feel of them, and compared it to knowing the feel of a genuine versus a fake dollar bill.
But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in.
She noticed that the markings on the ballots all looked exactly the same, with the white eclipse around the filled-in marking. Voiles had also previously written a sworn affidavit that 98% of the batch in question were for Joe Biden. The affidavit was included in Attorney Lynn Wood's lawsuit against the Georgia Secretary of State.
What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same.
And in the middle of the stack, Voiles said they found a single ballot that appeared to have been pulled from a printer or copier too soon because the image wasn't aligned properly on the paper. A state lawmaker questioned Voiles on whether the pristine nature of the ballots could be explained by the duplication process.
Well, couldn't that be explained by the fact that they were all personally replicated and duplicated with observation by individuals working that same poll?
Well, the probability of that, I would think, is very slight, because why would 98 ballots have that little white eclipse on the very first presidential ballot? Why would all of them be exactly the same? It was very easy to see that a ballot had been replicated many times.
She said it looked like the rest of the ballots were copies that had been marked by a printer or scanner, which could explain why the markings weren't properly aligned, leaving the white eclipse inside the bubble. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Following the hearings this week, Georgia's House of Representatives say there will be more hearings on election integrity next week. But the focus will be on ensuring the security and efficiency of the January runoff election for 2 Senate seats. The state's Governmental Affairs Committee said the committee will seek any credible evidence of fraud or wrongdoing and determine what, if any, legislative action may be necessary to preserve the sanctity of the ballot box. And Georgia's governor is urging the Secretary of State to take action. This after a video that the Trump campaign describes as game-changing went viral. NTD's Juliette Song reports.
Georgia's governor is calling for the state's top election official to verify ballot signatures. This after a video of alleged voter fraud went viral online. Speaking to Fox News, Governor Brian Kemp said, "I think it should be done. I think especially with what we saw today, it raises more questions. There needs to be transparency on that." The video he refers to was presented by the Trump campaign during a hearing this Thursday. The surveillance footage was filmed on Election Day inside Georgia's largest vote-counting center. A lawyer who volunteered for the Trump campaign testified in the hearing.
So according to the witnesses, the Republican observers, there is a lady who has blonde braids who comes out to announce, "We're going to stop counting. Everyone go home."
But after the Republican observers left, 4 poll workers stayed behind.
And they will continue counting unobserved, unsupervised, not in public view, as your statute requires, until about 1 in the morning.
At around 11 p.m., the workers pulled out boxes of ballots from a table covered with cloth.
So what are these ballots doing there, separate from all the other ballots? And why are they only counting them whenever the place is cleared out with no witnesses? Is the question.
Pick added that according to the footage, ballots are usually stored in the corner or come through the front door. It's an unusual practice for them to be put under a covered table. She said each machine can process about 3,000 ballots an hour, and there are multiple machines in the room, which raises another question.
So you do the math. How many ballots went through those machines in those 2 hours when there was no one there to supervise, to be present, consistent with your statutes and rules, to supervise the tabulation? We believe that could easily be, and probably is certainly, beyond the margin of victory in this race. Because if it's only 3 scanners working for 2 hours, right, that's 18,000 ballots that went through.
Currently, Biden leads Trump by less than 12,000 votes in Georgia. It's unclear if the votes tabulated without supervision were for Trump or Biden. 2 election officials in Georgia disputed some claims from the Trump campaign. They alleged no one asked the poll watchers to leave or stay, but didn't clarify why the ballots were pulled out from the cover table after the poll watchers were cleared. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Yesterday, an election fraud hearing was held in Nevada's capital. Both legal teams presented their evidence in a confident manner. Our reporters in Carson City have more.
Hearings for the disputed election results for Nevada began on December 3rd inside the Carson City Courthouse. Jesse Benall, leading attorney for the prosecution, gave a large list of alleged voter fraud. The list includes over 19,000 votes from out of state, over 8,000 votes from fake addresses, over 15,000 votes from a commercial address or a vacant property, over 6,000 votes from addresses that were flagged by the post office for non-delivery, over 1,500 votes from the deceased. According to Benall, that's not even the most compelling evidence.
And most compelling, most incredible, over 40,000 voters voted more than once. Everybody gets exactly 1 vote. No more, no less. You get 1 vote. The court heard this evidence today. We put on the exact case we wanted to put on, showing striking evidence of voter fraud and voter irregularities.
Benall said the court asked relevant questions, a sign that they are taking this case seriously.
If we are going to stand up for election integrity, if we're going to stand up for making sure it is the voters, legal voters, that choose the President of the United States and not bad actors, we have a long fight ahead of us. But this was a great day for being able to put real evidence of voter fraud in a courtroom.
For the defense, attorney Kevin Hamilton said the case should be dismissed based on a lack of evidence and specific names.
They allege that letter carriers violated USPS policies by delivering ballots to homes where voters didn't live. But they don't identify any of them. Your Honor, this is trial by allegation, not proof.
However, the Trump legal team alleges such proof is being obstructed. They said the obstruction came from the USPS and Nevada officials from both the state and county level. Further, witnesses have come forward to testify on behalf of the prosecution. Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union, said it is very hard to gather the evidence in such a short time.
This is the first time in the country that we're going to have a chance to present this evidence. Now, I spent 36 days in the recount in the year 2000 in Bush v. Gore, and we lost and lost and lost in court until we won. It's not about your record of how many wins and how many losses you have. It's about who prevails in the end. And if we count every legal vote, Donald Trump won the race.
Schlapp said he has over 1,000 testimonials and sworn statements from people who were either victims or witness to the wrongdoing.
Well, you can't have half the country doubt the election result. So win, lose, or draw, both sides should be completely invested in making sure that there's no illegal ballots in the count.
Both legal teams submitted their orders at 10 a.m., but the ruling will be delayed until a later time. Reporting by Andy Elsmore and David Lamb, NTD News, Carson City, Nevada.
And while the legal team presented evidence of election fraud in the courthouse yesterday, a rally was held outside where people voiced their opinion on the election outcome. Our reporters in Carson City heard from some of them.
Outside the Carson City courthouse, protesters coming from near and far waved signs in discontent with the election process.
It's an incredible moment for the campaign because now that the American people are going to hear the evidence themselves.
Duff came from Washington, D.C. and is on the president's campaign team. Nevada was one of her many stops along the way.
Everywhere I went, huge crowds were there because they supported and loved this president. But whereas Biden, you would see 6, 7, 12 people show up. It was like night and day. It's almost as if, without any analysis or even any data, Biden and Harris knew that they didn't have to campaign. That's what you naturally are drawn to want to believe. I'm not saying that's what they did know, but you would have to ask yourself, how is it a week before, 2 weeks before the election? He was putting a lid on it at 9 o'clock in the morning and going to bed or who knows what. This president was doing 4 and 5 rallies a day. He was asking for people to vote for him. And the average American...
Diego Martinez, who will be running for California governor in 2022, went to the courthouse in Nevada to speak about election suppression and integrity.
You talk about suppression where our voices are getting suppressed now. We need to have the ability to know that when we cast a vote, it's real, that our voices are being heard. Elections shouldn't be called a minute after we close when you still have people waiting to vote. Make it fair, make it right. The end of the election doesn't matter as much as the integrity of the election. That's what's more important. So it doesn't matter what side.
The crowd has gathered because this could be the beginning. So begins with the evidence being heard in a court to be moved to the next court that needs to hear it. We're standing in a moment in time in history that is epoch.
Engelkirk ran for a position in a general improvement district in Nevada's Douglas County. She encouraged others to run for office to be a voice for the people.
If Trump were to have lost this election in a fair, true election, I would accept the results. I would accept that Joe Biden won, but I can't accept it because I know that there are thousands and thousands of affidavits and people witnessed voter fraud taking place.
Where we're finally seeing the deep corruption, international corruption being revealed. And I don't think we're going to put up with it. I think Americans are stronger than that. Our Constitution is not going to put up with this. No one is going to take over our Constitution and usurp it and turn us into communist China. We're not going to put up with it. That's why I'm here.
Protesters continued to make their voices heard on Friday morning. Reporting by Andy Elsmore, NTD News, Carson City, Nevada.
Earlier this week, we reported on a group that's under scrutiny in a number of election-related court cases. It received hundreds of millions of dollars from Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg for local elections. NTD's Patrick Hayden spoke to an attorney who's been investigating how these funds were used.
In March, a former Obama campaign manager, David Plouffe, published a book called The Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. The book said the 2020 election will come down to a fight in the cities of Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit. During this time, Plouffe was working for Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. Fast forward 6 months, in September, Zuckerberg donated $400 million to an organization called the Center for Tech and Civic Life, or CTCL, to help with local elections. Amistad Project Director Philip Klein obtained a court order from the Middle District of Pennsylvania to view Philadelphia's communications with CTCL.
Those communications show that CTCL dictated the way the election would be run in Philadelphia. how many polling places they would have. They paid the election officials. They paid the satellite election officials. They paid the judges. They brought in these drop boxes.
Klein says CTCL is responsible for the consolidation of counting centers.
You have a flow of private funds through a charity into the Maricopa County Election Center, kind of dictating how they're going to manage the elections.
He says evidence of the partisan control can be seen in how drop boxes were placed in Democratic neighborhoods versus Republican.
Delaware County, Pennsylvania. There's one of these drop boxes for every 4 square miles, 2 miles by 2 miles square. That's a drop box within walking distance of your home in Democrat stronghold Delaware County. In the 59 counties that the president won in 2016, there's one drop box for every 1,100 square miles.
Klein says we effectively have a shadow government because the total federal funding for elections has been matched by Zuckerberg's funding. He says the partisan effect of this funding is a violation of equal protection laws. He says there's a lot of evidence of this in swing states. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
A former lieutenant general of the U.S. Air Force has a message for the American people. He says there is not just election fraud taking place, but acts of treason. He's calling on the president to declare a national emergency and arrest the perpetrators. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
Is he part of the deep state?
Former Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney has come out on the record alleging that treason against the nation is taking place surrounding the presidential election. He says the attempt to steal the election from President Trump is the largest cyber warfare activity in the world. McInerney says there are 2 groups involved, both the foreign states of China, Russia, and Iran, as well as U.S. citizens.
This is 6 to 10 states bonding together to manipulate their data to take control of the U.S. government and the chief executive officer, the commander-in-chief. So this is not anything to be taken lightly. It's not dirty politics or tricks. It is treason by the very nature against the United States government and the people of America.
A cybersecurity expert signed an affidavit saying TV news stations reported the counting stopped in 5 swing states the morning after the election. He calls this highly unusual and says it may indicate prior coordination, but says they did not stop counting and did so behind closed doors, demonstrating collusion to get the results they wanted in secret. General McInerney outlines a 5-fold plan for tackling what he calls a national emergency.
Initiate the Insurrection Act, declare martial law, suspend habeas corpus, and set up military tribunals. Those are the things that must be done in this emergency. It is a national emergency of whether we're going to continue forward as a democratic republic or go into a totalitarian society.
General McInerney's plan starts with the president declaring a national emergency as per Trump's 2018 executive order on foreign interference with the election. Then he suggests implementing the Insurrection Act to quell potential riots by Antifa and BLM, who he says will want to create chaos if Trump wins. Then declare martial law, suspend habeas corpus, and set up military tribunals to arrest and try those who participated in the steal, people he's identified but can't disclose. He says the problem must be solved now or never.
And if we don't solve it now, it'll never be solved because we will move into a tyrannical situation that will eventually be, whether you can call it social democrats or communists, it's going to be both the same. It's just a different name.
What's more, General McInerney said the vote-switching applications Hammer and Scorecard were in use in this election, as well as in 2016. He says Dominion Voting Systems' central server farm was moved to Frankfurt, Germany, where rogue elements of the CIA had it. U.S. Special Forces then seized it, and he says the White House has confirmed the U.S. has possession of them. He says he does not know whether or not there were casualties during the seizure. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Information about voter fraud in the 2020 election has been widely censored across social media platforms. But one nonpartisan website is giving people the ability to acquire and share information all in one place.
Shortly after Election Day, a citizen coalition launched a website called everylegalvote.com. The website is uncovering incidents of fraud and their impacts on the 2020 election. Host of the Economic War Room and co-founder of Every Legal Vote, Kevin Freeman, says they don't ask for donations.
That's not our purpose here. Our purpose here is almost a social media sharing site so that people who are experiencing electoral fraud or are just interested in clean and fair elections are jumping on, because Twitter and Facebook and so many of the other social media sites have blocked any stories.
According to Freeman, Every Legal Vote has been getting thousands of reports from people who thought that election integrity was compromised. Everyday voters who witnessed unusual circumstances stepped forward, along with MIT statisticians who found there was no logic behind the voting data. Freeman said there will be a new report coming out soon showing the questionable method in which Dominion voting systems tabulated votes.
It's not the normal common sense way that you'd say, oh, here's a vote for Trump, we'll count one here. Here's a vote for Biden, we'll count one there. It is a very complex, convoluted way for them to record votes, and yet it leaves open the possibility of changing votes from one candidate to another.
Some of the reports have not been made public on their websites because people are afraid of retribution or legal teams might want to examine it. Freeman is asking for patience and for people to understand there could be nefarious groups trying to manipulate the U.S. election system. Reporting by Sherry Dong and Don Tran.
Georgia attorney Lin Wood claims that the Chinese regime sent Dominion $400 million ahead of the election. That's through a Swiss bank subsidiary. There's no direct proof of the claim, but public information does show ties between China, the bank, and Dominion.
Attorney Lin Wood claimed on December 1st that Communist China purchased Dominion voting for $400 million. He published a link to a U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filing showing Dominion Voting Systems' parent company receiving $400 million from a Swiss bank subsidiary. The transaction itself does not directly show what the attorney alleges it to be. However, it does show ties between the voting software company and the Chinese regime. The transaction happened less than a month before the election. According to a press release, the party that received the money, Staple Street Capital, acquired Dominion Voting System in 2018. The acquirer calls itself a New York-based middle-market private equity firm. The party that paid the money is UBS Securities LLC, a subsidiary of Swiss investment bank UBS. But UBS is not necessarily the eventual buyer in the transaction. As an investment firm, it could have just served as a middleman, selling partnership interests of Staple Street Capital to UBS clients or holding it on behalf of clients through its prime broker. So how is this related to the Chinese Communist Party? In another Twitter post, Lin Wood claims the Chinese regime to be the major shareholder of the middleman UBS Securities. Through state entities, China does own much stock of UBS's Beijing-based joint venture. But the joint venture's name is UBS Securities Co. Limited, whereas the entity sending money to Dominion is UBS Securities LLC, which is based in New York. The New York subsidiary is a private firm, so its shareholders' information is not open to the public. However, a closer look into the New York subsidiary shows that among 4 of its board members, who are appointed by shareholders, 3 appear to be Chinese. One of them is Ye Xiang, a Chinese national, who also served as a board member of the Beijing-based UBS. The person had worked at the Chinese regime's central bank, the state-owned Bank of China, as well as the Hong Kong government's financial regulatory agencies. UBS is the first foreign bank that's allowed to have a fully licensed security joint venture in China's very restricted financial market. The facilitator of the joint venture is Chinese Vice Premier Wang Qishan, who is deemed the most finance-savvy communist official. He was the mayor of Beijing in 2006 when he met with UBS's then-chairman Marcel Ospel. According to a Chinese company profiling website, after the 2020 election, the Beijing UBS went through a major leadership turnover on November the 30th. One day before Lin Wood's tweet about UBS, 12 out of its 15 board of directors quit, including Ye Xiang, the New York UBS board member mentioned earlier. Another who just quit the board is Cheng Yixun, the former CEO of UBS's Beijing-based joint venture and an expert hired in the Chinese Communist Party's Thousand Talents program. The U.S. Senate deems the program a threat to U.S. national security. According to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, UBS is among the major Western banks that played a key role as middlemen in helping Chinese communist officials set up trusts and companies at offshore centers usually associated with hidden wealth. The SEC filing shows only 2 transactions related to Dominion's parent company. Both are from UBS's New York subsidiary. Other than the $400 million transaction in October, Dominion received $200 million from UBS in 2014. In a previous voter fraud lawsuit filed by Sidney Powell, a former military intelligence official claimed in an affidavit that Chinese operatives had access to Dominion voting system in several key states. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
The democratically controlled House approved a bill that decriminalizes marijuana at the federal level. This is the first time Congress has acted on this issue.
On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 164. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The bill was passed largely on party lines. 222 Democrats were in favor of the decriminalization, and 158 Republicans were against it. 6 Democrats voted against the act, and 5 Republicans voted for it. The bill also introduces measures to cancel marijuana-related arrests and low-level federal convictions. But this bill is not expected to pass in the Republican-controlled Senate. And Facebook is spearheading a project to rank different types of hate speech and police anti-black speech more aggressively than anti-white speech. NTD's Christina Kim has the details.
According to internal documents obtained by the Washington Post, Facebook is developing a new system to classify and deal with hate speech called the WOW Project, which is still in its early stages. This project places a higher priority on deleting speech that they deem the worst of the worst, which includes slurs directed at blacks, Muslims, people of more than one race, the LGBTQ community, and Jews. Facebook assigns statements different numerical scores, which are weighted based on their perceived harm. So, for example, the company would now prioritize automatically removing statements like gay people are disgusting over statements like men are pigs. In the first phase of the project, Facebook's engineers deprioritized policing contemptuous comments about whites, men, and Americans. While the company still considers attacks against these groups as hate speech, it will now be low sensitivity. In other words, the algorithm will no longer automatically delete this kind of hate speech because they deem it less likely to be harmful. This will show approximately 10,000 fewer deleted posts a day. In June, white trash, a gay slur, and cracker were one of the top 3 removed hate speech. Following the nationwide protests beginning with the death of George Floyd, some within Facebook believed that the platform's attempt to treat all users equally was causing problems for its black users, who are the most active and vulnerable users. Facebook spokesperson Sally Aldis explained the move, saying, "We know that hate speech targeted towards underrepresented groups can be the most harmful, which is why we have focused our technology on finding the hate speech that users and experts tell us is the most serious." Some are commending this change, calling it long overdue. Arisha Hatch, vice president at racial justice movement Color of Change, said this is confirmation of what they have been demanding for years, an enforcement regime that takes power and historical dynamics into account. Others criticize this directive, saying that the platform all but suggested it's okay to express hatred against whites, Christians, Americans, and men, but not other groups. Some claim it's reminiscent of George Orwell's Animal Farm, where everyone is equal, but some are more equal than others. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Up next, New York City, normally enchanting at Christmas time, but this year there's less sparkling in the window displays. And luxury shops on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles are also adapting to the pandemic. Travel restrictions and state lockdown measures are keeping shoppers at home. More on that after the break.
Are you looking for a news source that does not spin the truth, doesn't push any false narratives, and instead presents you with the facts and lets you make up your own mind? Then go to readepic.com and try the Epic Times newspaper for yourself. It's pure honest journalism that's based in traditional values.
New York City is one of the world's most beautiful places when it comes to Christmas decorations, but stores are not displaying as much as usual this year.
Despite the cold December weather in the city, people usually come here to see what new decorations each location has to offer. One of the best places to do that is Fifth Avenue. We used footage we took in recent years to show you how it usually looks on the famous shopping street. The difference compared to this year is striking.
So as we can see, the decoration in these stores in recent years has been far more spectacular than they are this year. We asked New Yorkers what they think about this change.
I see a difference here because these would be much more ornate. And there's like a painted backdrop and a proscenium. There's really nothing going on there.
But not only the decorations themselves have been scaled down this year. Usually, the shops on Fifth Avenue hold a big event when they unveil their decorations for the year.
Like you couldn't go in the store at all and there was just people outside. And so I haven't been like really doing much shopping myself, but they are empty, I know that.
Several well-known brands in the area are struggling to keep their stores running. The Italian fashion company Valentino Spa has sued the landlord of its Fifth Avenue store. They argue they can't keep their store open due to government restrictions and were trying to void their lease. Reporting by Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
A surge in CCP virus cases in Los Angeles has taken its toll on businesses in the run-up to the holidays, with people staying at home or not having the money to shop.
Rodeo Drive is beginning to look a little like Christmas, but this world-famous shopping street has been scaled back. The pandemic has grounded flights for many international customers. New stay-at-home measures ordered by the state of California are keeping local customers away too. Italian fashion label Stefano Ricci is an in-the-know brand with China's ultra-wealthy. It relies more on word-of-mouth advertising instead of social media or publicity.
And the luxury, very high price, items like suits or jackets is not selling that well because we're not going anywhere. We cannot go anywhere,
But it seems nothing will stop dedicated shoppers who are looking for luxury. Online retail sales have skyrocketed in 2020, and time is on the side of shops like Stefano Ricci. Kathy Gahari, vice president of the Rodeo Drive Committee, says luxury will find a way. She acknowledges sales are generally down during the pandemic, but not for everyone.
But the existing luxury client who is continuous in their purchases, their shopping desires hasn't really changed. Again, it's what they buy, not if they buy.
The frenetic holiday frenzy to get to the shops in time may be gone, but the spirit of Christmas cheer continues in a quietly stylish way.
And China requires colleges across the country to send their graduates to Western, poorer regions. This as many face challenges in finding jobs. That and more when we return. Now we turn to China. Colleges across the country saw some of the biggest graduating classes in recent years. But that, coupled with the pandemic, is leading to difficulty finding jobs. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
First, we looked at China's unemployment situation. China's Ministry of Education issued a notice earlier this week, detailing how colleges and universities should guide this year's graduating class on finding work. The notice requires colleges across the country to send their graduates to the West, toward poorer regions that have been labeled key employment areas. According to official figures, 8.7 million Chinese students graduated college this year, a historical high. The record is expected to be broken again next year with 9 million or more. Earlier this year, the director of the Employment Promotion Department, part of China's Ministry of Human Resources, made a statement on the topic. He admitted that under the influence of the pandemic, college graduates are facing difficulty in obtaining employment. Market demand has fallen, and companies have delayed recruiting new workers. Chinese authorities had already extended efforts in recent months to make the country's employment figure look better. A previous notice from the Ministry of Education added new jobs to the employment list, including online shop owners, social media celebrities, and electronic sports players. These people will no longer be considered as unemployed, regardless of how much they earn. The recent notice encouraging college graduates to work in China's undeveloped West is seen as an even bigger attempt to solve the unemployment problem. Some scholars say the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is embracing a similar mindset as during the time of the down to the countryside political movement back in the 1960s and 1970s. At the time, about 20 million high school and middle school graduates were forced out of cities and effectively exiled to remote areas of China. Some of them were forced to stay there for 2 decades. They lost their opportunity to attend college and work towards getting a better job later in life. This group is often referred to as China's lost generation. Current CCP head Xi Jinping was also among them. One of the goals of the movement was to solve employment problems plaguing China at the time. Li Yuanhua, a former associate professor at Beijing Capital Normal University, says he believes the current effort won't yield the results regime officials are hoping for. He explained that many college students from impoverished areas go to college in order to change their destiny and seek a better life through education, adding that it's not possible for them to go back to poverty-stricken areas.
A woman in the UK is pleading for her abducted mother in China to be released. Her mother practices a traditional spiritual discipline, which continues to be persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party. Here's our UK correspondent Jane Werrell with more.
These are the only photos Ming Hui Yu has with her mother. Speaking from the UK, she tells us the news that her mother, Mei Hong Wang, has been abducted in China again.
They take everything away from her, including computers, a computer, a USB, and her keys.
Yu's family was forced to split up almost 20 years ago. Her parents practice Falun Gong, an ancient Chinese meditation practice that follows the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. In 1999, then leader of the Chinese Communist Party, also known as the CCP, ordered the eradication of Falun Gong. And this year, there have been more cases of practitioners being persecuted.
They're a very gentle people, the Falun Gong. They're certainly not controversial, and they just want to be able to worship in the way that they can. I believe that every person across the world has a right and should be given the right to worship wherever they can, whenever they can, and whatever way they want to.
Yu found out her mother was illegally detained, then sent to Harbin City Hospital police station and has called them every day. Sometimes she gets through.
Told me they didn't give me any clear information or any clear reason, so they just told me something like, you don't talk with policemen about law or regulation.
A 2007 report says the hospital has a backyard where Falun Gong practitioners have been previously murdered. Executive Director of the Falun Dafa Information Centre, Levi Browdy, says what CCP officials fear the most is public pressure.
We've even had government officials that have said, give me the phone number to the labor camp or the detention center where this person's being held, and pick up the phone and call them. This kind of pressure is really what helps the most, and we've seen many cases where immediately they'll back out. They'll sort of back down. Sometimes they'll even release people.
Member of Parliament Jim Shannon says he can directly take Yi's mother's case up with the UK Foreign Secretary.
Yes, it's not about me, it's about my mother. I hope the authority could release her right now and stop the persecution.
She hopes the persecution will end not just for her parents, but for the millions who are persecuted for their faith in her native China. Jane Rurrell, NTD News, London.
And up next, Brexit trade talks are entering a crucial moment as the deadline of the UK's transitional period approaches. But with both sides asking for compromise, results of the talks are not easy to predict. And the world's largest Danish glass exhibition is on, with 42,000 pieces of glass from Carlsberg beer bottles to glasses used at a Michelin star restaurant. We look at the world-famous Danish glass. That and more when we return.
This season, take an incredible journey through 5,000 years of culture with Shen Yun. Discover why people are calling Shen Yun a visual feast, a pleasure to the ear, an epic tale, a must-see. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
He ascended to the throne during the most turbulent times in the Joseon dynasty. Despite that, he treated his people well, had great ambitions, and led the country towards a new renaissance. That eventually earned him the title as one of the wisest kings in Korean history. Lee Sun on NTD America.
Over to Europe. The UK voted to leave the EU more than 4 years ago, but post-Brexit trade talks are still on. On some crucial issues, the EU wants to keep the status quo, but the UK wants sovereignty. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Hello and welcome to NTD UK with UK and European news. Post-Brexit trade talks between the UK and the EU are entering a make-or-break moment as the deadline approaches.
The European Union's chief negotiator says Friday is an important day and he will work to bridge gaps between both sides. With less than 4 weeks left before the UK officially exits the EU, both sides are asking for a compromise. The UK Business Secretary says time is short and the talks are at a difficult phase.
That we want the EU to recognise that the UK is a sovereign and independent nation, and it is on the basis of that that a deal will be done.
The European Council President says any agreement must be approved by the 27 member states.
We want a deal, not at any cost. This is not new, and we understand that for the European Union, the question of the level playing field is key.
France says it needs to protect its fishermen and companies and could veto a bad deal. The main impasses in the talks are fishing rights and business competition rules. Fishing industry representatives tell the French government that the access to British waters is indispensable for the industry. On the competition rules, the EU emphasises fair competition, while the UK insists on sovereignty.
In Belgium, an anaesthesiologist was fired after questioning government virus measures. In France, some doctors are facing similar pressure and denounced the suppression of speech. Our French correspondent met one of them.
Belgian anaesthetologist Pascal Sacré was fired on October 27th by the hospital he worked at. The decision came after Sacré posted on social media about the pandemic. In short videos, he says there's no such thing as, quote, a second wave of the virus, that tests are inaccurate and that the lockdown should be questioned. A similar scenario unfolded in France. In France, Dr. Louis Fouché says doctors are facing an unprecedented situation.
This is like killing the messenger. If the administration doesn't like what you're saying, it seems they can fire you anytime.
In his Marseille public hospital, Fouché says the administration threatened to fire him after he spoke to the media and questioned what he calls, quote, government narratives. 5,000 people messaged the hospital administration supporting him. He also points out the role of media and social media who support the same narrative.
We published scientific data on YouTube and our video was deleted for 10 days. This is amazing. Why does big tech have the say? If they try so hard to push narratives, maybe we shouldn't listen to them.
Fouché advocates to end the lockdown as soon as possible and to be tolerant in the debate.
What we need to remember is to be benevolent with each other, including with people who disagree with us. Spend time together and take care of people nearby us.
Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
Due to the pandemic, the tourist-popular hotel Avenir Montmartre has lost its usual guests and is instead opening their doors for the homeless.
Ibrahim, a Malian asylum seeker, would be sleeping in restaurant kitchens or outdoors if it were not for his room in this hotel.
It was difficult, but I'm here. The day I arrived, I said, great, I see the future.
The cost of his room is covered by a homeless charity. Residents receive 3 meals a day.
Here we have men who were living on the streets, who broke their links socially or with their families, or had a traumatic migration experience.
The director of the charity is concerned over the potential crisis ahead.
People are still on the streets, and there is particularly one worrying situation, an economic consequence of the COVID crisis for people who have been in shelters and are currently becoming impoverished.
The Paris City Hall counted 3,600 homeless people on the streets in its field survey last January.
Danish glass design is world famous and the world's largest display of Danish design glass is on.
42,000 pieces of glass are on display at the Year of the Glass show, from Carlsberg beer bottles to glasses for a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Copenhagen.
In this moment, Danish art design, glass art design, is leading really the trends in glass design in the world.
The show aims to highlight the technological, scientific and economic importance of glass. The Crown Princess of Denmark opened the show.
It's very inspiring. It's a wonderful museum, a fantastic cultural history journey of from industry to decoration and so forth. So it was a really wonderful museum that's very inspiring.
The exhibition is held at Holmegaard Works, Denmark's first glass factory to make art and bottles for, among others, brewing company Carlsberg in the early 19th century.
As winter draws in, one country house in the UK begins its dazzling winter light show.
About 2 hours from London, Wakehurst in Sussex delights visitors with its annual winter light show. It has over 1,000 lanterns installed across its gardens.
And we actually want to enhance what's here, so it's subtlety, it's light, it's sound, it's a sort of sensory layer that we add onto the landscape to really kind of bring the place at night to life for our visitors.
This year the designs are inspired by the workings of nature that generally go unnoticed, like the spores of plants settling and fungi enriching the landscape.
We came last year and I feel like this year is really outstanding. It's much even better than last year. I feel like the whole trail, we love walking around the lanterns with the kids. It's just really magical.
Even though the pandemic presented many challenges to the annual feature during the preparation, they hope the winter light displays can lift people's spirits.
That's all from us for now. Back over to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.